A few months ago, Pastor Angel and I had an email conversation that turned into a real conversation, and it centered around the problem of racial issues in the ELCA. And we got together and had a conversation in person at, and I must admit there were margaritas involved, and margaritas. And that kind of, we thought that was a really interesting conversation, and we expanded it to include Pastor Mail and my wife Jerry. And we thought, what can we do within the context of our own church to try to deal with these issues in a more positive way? And so we came up with the idea that we would start to ask people to get up in front of the congregation and talk about their own personal experiences with race. And so I'm the first one to do this. And I thought about what I was going to say and what different ways I could say it. And what I decided was I'm going to kind of give a little series of small examples from my own childhood growing up. As you can tell, I'm a middle-aged white guy in my 50s, and that means I grew up in the 60s, but I grew up in a place in the Midwest called Iowa, and I looked it up today. Actually, it's one of the whitest states in the country. Right now, it's only there's only 6% non-white people in Iowa, and I bet at the time I grew up, Jerry and I both from there, probably half of that. And so, being a middle-class kid growing up in kind of a normal neighborhood, basically I didn't realize or think about it, but I was there was basically all my friends were white kids. And you didn't think about race, it wasn't even an issue, really. But I think back, and one of the earliest things I can remember that kind of had something to do with it was when we were choosing sides to play games. And we would go, eeny, meeny, miny, mo, catch up. But we didn't say tiger. We said something else. And it didn't mean anything at the time, but we said it over and over again. And it was like, what a nasty little thing to say. But that's kind of the way things went. A few years later, probably in the late 60s, I was probably like third grade or so, happened to be the day that Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. And I remember being upset about that and thinking about it. I kept thinking to myself, why would anyone want to kill Martin Luther King? I mean, what did he do to deserve that? And I remember walking home from school one day with my friends, and I was talking about it with him, and he looked at me and he says, well, my mom says, wherever he went, trouble followed. So she wasn't surprised. And I thought to myself, does she mean he deserved it somehow? It just didn't make sense, right? So that always stuck with me. The following year, we had a student teacher in our class in 4th grade. And he was from Chicago. And a really cool young guy, and all the kids really liked him. But he had this sort of passion about inequality and racial issues that were kind of at the forefront at that point. And kind of, got us thinking in a different direction, wondering about it, thinking about it. Kind of also stuck with me. A few years later, fast forward, I'm in high school, and I think about it now, like almost every kid in my high school was white, and this was like 2,000 people. And I remember two young kids came in the middle of the school year. They were transferred. Both of them are African Americans, twins actually. And I was in the band, and one of the kids was in the band. And I kept thinking, well, I felt these kids seemed out of place, and they seemed kind of awkward. And I don't know. I tried to be friendly and stuff, but I couldn't really. I didn't feel like I could really relate, or just kind of didn't go very well. A couple years later, I'm in college. I'm in my freshman year in a big state college, and I'm in a dorm, and the person that was in charge of our floor came to me and said, we have a person in our dorm that's asked for a change in roommates, and apparently one of the kids was an African American kid from Chicago, and he said, would you be willing to live with Rick, his name was? I said, sure, why not? And we actually became really good friends, and we later got an apartment on our own. And that was another thing that I was, all of a sudden now he's my friend, I'm with his group of friends, he's with my group of friends. And I kind of saw it a little bit differently at that point. I mean, race was not something that you could just think about. In his case, he kind of went the line between, and I kind of did as well in some ways. So then a few years later, we move out here, and things are very different. We've lived here ever since. Now we're in a very different kind of place. But I guess as I think back, to me, being sort of on the white side, if you will, of this kind of system that we grew up in, it wasn't something that I had anything to do with as far as the system, but it is something that, because of just the way it was, I had advantages, I had things I could, even though it was normal and I didn't think about it, as I look back now and as I look forward, basically it's kind of a system of sin, the way I see it, and this is a church, and I think we should all be able to stand up and look at each other and say, we participate in it, and we're in it. It's not just something we can help. It's kind of like it's in the air we breathe and the water we drink. It's just kind of this poison that's there, and it affects us in different ways. And so, I guess that's kind of my experience. It's maybe not that different than most people. I think it's not like racism is like from bad people. It's just a system, and so. I'm hoping that other people will be willing to stand up and give their perspective, good, bad, if you're on the benefiting side or the kind of not so good side. Hopefully people will get out and be willing to share.